Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. My name is Brendan Decora, and each week I'll be hosting different guests, mainly engineers and producers, but also people from across the industry. Enjoy the show. On today's episode, we have Ethan Mates. He's an engineer, mixer, and producer who has credits with Linkin Park, Tupac, the Chili Peppers, and many more. Enjoy. So, first and foremost, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure.
Awesome. I'd like to start by, if you could go through your backstory, kind of how you got to where you are.
Sure. Well, I grew up playing instruments.
Okay.
My parents started me playing violin when I was less than 4.
Wow.
This thing called the Suzuki method.
Yeah.
Which is like designed for super young kids.
I just remembered I actually started that with classical guitar when I was like 5 or 6.
Right.
And I never stuck with guitar. I switched to drums later, but
right.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, and they really emphasize ear training when you're really little. So, you know, it's like you're just sort of like repeating what the teacher's playing you. And I remember we had these little like pieces of paper that you put on the floor with the outline of your feet so you can stand correctly and stuff. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Dang.
Nice. So I did that, and I played most of the way through high school.
Okay.
That just sort of like became a chore, you know, as it often does when it's like your parents are like shoving it down your throat.
Yeah.
So I played piano for a little bit, and then I started playing guitar when I was probably like, I don't know, 12 maybe, 10-ish, 12, somewhere in there.
Nice.
And it was just like, sort of with the understanding that this was my thing, and I was going to do it when I wanted to, and, you know, like kind of have it just like butt out. Right,
exactly.
Which worked reasonably well.
Yeah, nice.
So I played in bands in junior high school and high school, and we would record ourselves, and that was always kind of fun for me. And, you know, we would like get yard sale equipment. I remember there was like there was a Sam Ash that was fairly close to us, and they would have all these like ridiculous sales. It was like buy, you know, 8 microphone cables and get the microphones free. You know, like stuff. I remember that was one of them.
Jeez.
So we did that, and we would like put them all in the drum kit, and it was you know. Yeah. And we would take like wresling mats and kind of build little huts around stuff, and like just like turn my
making it work
basement into, you know,
nice.
From cool. Like, you know, like watching that documentary of the Black Album making or whatever, you know, like just being like, ooh, there's a little hut around that, so we need to do that. Right.
And was that here in LA or?
No, I was in New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so yeah, that was kind of it, and then I went to NYU. Okay. For there was really no like recording department at the time. Right. And I had been doing like one of the ways that I was like getting credits and stuff in high school was doing like the sound and the lighting design and stuff for the theater. Right. So that was kind of my in to getting into that department. Right. But I really didn't like it. Okay. At all. Jeez. And it was, I mean, whatever. I think it's a great program. It just wasn't for me. Right. It was like, it was a lot of, you had to get through a lot of conceptual stuff before you could really start messing with stuff. And it just, Yeah. And I wasn't even necessarily such have a passion for like the theater itself that I wanted to like, because they would make you take like acting classes and stuff just as part of this thing. And I was
just part of the whole program.
Really don't want to do that.
Yeah. Right. Jeez.
So I left and was just kind of like aimless for a year or two, just kind of like, you know, installing car stereos and doing stupid stuff and, you know, that kind of stuff. So I was at that point at my parents' house, and which was, they lived at Long Island at this point. Okay. And I would always pass the place called Cove City Sound Studios on my way to like the detail place. Okay. I was like, that seems cool, you know. Again, not really knowing anything about it, so I just walked in. Okay. And then one afternoon, and I was like, I'm just going to see what this is about. So maybe I get a job. Having no idea about the hierarchy of anything or anything. I didn't know anything about anything. And the owner happened to be there. Huh, nice. And really nice guy. It was owned by 2 people. It was owned by this guy, Richie Kanata, who it's still owned by. Right. Who is a saxophone player and has played with like the Beach Boys, Billy Joel.
Wow.
He's done a lot of stuff. And the co-owner was Rick Wake, who's a producer who did a ton of stuff late 90s, early 2000s. He was a staff Sony guy for a while.
Okay.
He produced like Celine Dion,
nice.
Mark Anthony, the first Jennifer Lopez album. At the time, it was like, had it popping.
Nice.
So they co-owned it and they would share the space. And then Rick Wake also owned a studio in Manhattan, which was like half an hour away.
Okay.
But anyway, so the owner offered me, he was just like, well, yeah, you just start coming and hanging out.
Okay.
And like learning stuff.
Right. Started as the runner, basically. And
yeah.
Nice.
And I remember the chief engineer was really pissed because he hadn't been consulted or anything like that. I had to like overcome that for a couple of weeks. But fortunately for me, the assistant that they had, I was, as you can, I'm sure you were the same way. When you get into that environment, it's just like you're just so stoked to be there. Right. And there's like all this cool stuff, and it's just like the coolest place in the world. That's the only thing you want to do is like be in the studio and then like go home and sleep for a couple hours.
Exactly.
And they had an assistant there who'd been there like a little too long.
Okay.
And was really like over it and being really sloppy and just like it was not a good scenario.
Right.
So the second that I was like able to like, recall the SSL and like align a tape machine, like he was gone.
Okay. Wow.
So I got very lucky in that respect. It was literally like a few weeks.
Dang. Yeah. Nice. That's crazy.
Which is
a few weeks between like walking in off the street knowing nothing or Jesus.
And
nice.
Probably like 6 weeks maybe.
That's crazy.
And it just, it was just a perfect storm of stuff. And then the second perfect storm after that was that this was right when Pro Tools was starting to be a thing.
Okay.
And they were like having to do it for sessions. And all of the engineers who worked for this company were a little older. Most of them, there were a couple younger, slightly younger guys, but most of them were a little older, were very like tape. Some of them like to use like Dolby on the tape and like really, really old school.
Yeah.
They were not interested in Pro Tools. So there was like, you figure it out.
Right.
Which initially I was like, oh, that sucks. I want to use the tape machine. That's way cooler. Exactly. But then when you start to be like getting, actually people want to like calling or like, hey, can you have him here because I need to do this? And then you start to get like, a little thing happening.
Nice. That's crazy.
And that was it. And then so we started going, they started putting me in the sessions in the city and going back and forth and blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And then when I was assisting at the place in Manhattan, they had done a rock album for this band named Drill, which the guy had produced. And it had like, I don't forget who they had done it the first time. And I guess even, I don't know, it doesn't matter. And it wasn't done well. So I don't like shit on anybody anyway. Right. So they hired this guy, Jimbo Barton, to come out to New York and basically fix it.
Okay.
It's like, you got to check out the multis, you have to re-record vocals, like we got like mix it,
Jeez.
So, and that turned into like 8 months or something like that. It was nuts. Yeah. It was like and I assisted him on all that. And we got to be pretty friendly, and he, showed me a ton of stuff, and he was like an insanely meticulous mixer, like I hadn't really experienced before.
Nice.
So that was cool.
Awesome. And what led you to come out to LA?
Well, at the time, I had a group.
Okay.
Which was sort of like, we were sort of like, just wanted to be the Roots, basically.
Okay.
Nice. So it was like kind of hip-hop, there's a bunch of live instruments and stuff. Right. And he was managed by a company, and he kind of dug it, and he played it for them. They're like, yeah, bring him out here. Let's do the whole thing. So we, recorded a bunch of shit, brought it out to LA for him to mix, met the managers, the whole thing.
Nice.
And the manager, not the owner, but the studio manager in New York, prior to us leaving, I had, at that, you make no money or whatever. I'd saved up for like 6 months to buy a plane ticket to get out there or whatever. The studio manager's like, oh, my friend's band's coming in. You need to record them this weekend.
Oh, jeez.
And I was like, I can't.
Right.
I have this plane ticket. I have this time. You signed off on my time off. He's like, well, this is how the studio game works. And I was like, sorry. And then I just left. And then after that, they were just like, fuck you, don't come back. But at that point, I was out here. Right. And he helped me, introduce me to a couple people. Nice. And I was like, started assisting a little bit, doing Pro Tools, recorded a couple bands. I got introduced to Ed Gaudreau, who's the studio manager at Interscope.
Okay.
And right when they first started building those studios.
Okay.
And I had actually met him at this place prior to that where we had started working called Soul 7, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was owned by Michael Boddicker.
Was that on? Did they have a sign out front? I remember seeing that.
It was like Ventura.
Yeah,
maybe.
like that.
It was kind of in the back of a parking lot by dry cleaners and stuff.
Sounds familiar.
It was really cool. And he was a synth player who was like one of Quincy Jones's main guys and all this stuff. Still is, but
nice.
So he had this insane accumulation of equipment, and it also leased some package of gear with an SSL and all this stuff. So it was super cool.
Right.
So we were in there and doing stuff, and he had kind of hired us to help put it all together and everything. And then he hired Ed as a studio manager, who had come from A&M, and then so they knew him. And then when they started building Interscope, they rehired him to build that. And then as it was built, he sort of like, brought me over to start engineering stuff. And so there I did like Black Eyed Peas, all this old Tupac stuff, Trackmasters. I'm trying to promote a million things. But and then I met somebody there who knew Jim Scott.
Okay.
And they got into a jam. I think it was Andrew Sheps was supposed to do the Pro Tools for that album, by the way. And Jim Scott was going to engineer it. And then at the last minute, Rick needed Andrew to do a different album.
Okay.
Maybe be the main guy or whatever it was. Finish up something very important. So then I was supposed to just start for a few weeks and kind of cover him. And then we ended up just kind of getting along and did the whole album and whatever. Nice. But that's how,
Okay.
And then...
Yeah.
The
rest
that's kind of how things started. Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. So one of the things I like to talk about a lot on this podcast is kind of how to inspire artists in the studio to get great performances. How do you, like when you're first starting a project, how do you usually chat with artists about their vision so you can make sure to capture that?
Yeah, I think doing the work beforehand is huge to like have success in a session. And part of that is talking, I've had artists be as specific as like, I only use this mic and blah, blah, blah. And great. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then others will send you a Spotify playlist of like, I love these drum sounds, which is all of that is awesome. Any information that you can get beforehand is great.
Exactly.
And then I also, budgets often don't allow this, but if I'm doing an album or like something where we're going to be like working for a while, I'll always try to get at least like a half day prior to the band coming in. Because I really I want everything to be set up, tested. I want to have a couple cool sounds up on the keyboard, a couple pedals going, the guitars, everything, like some options in case they're like, I hate the snare. We were like, oh, well, we got this on the stand. Let's pop this. So it's like in situations like that, where it's like you're doing a tracking and it's like a whole thing, like I really I never want anybody to be like waiting on me.
Right.
You want to be like as streamlined as possible. Be like, okay, cool, boom. Like this, you want to play Rhodes? Cool, yeah, just unmute that input. We're like, let's go.
Right. Awesome.
And I think that's really important because I've seen so many times, like in being an assistant or just seeing other things going on, where it's like something breaks or like the Pro Tools starts acting stupid or the tube dies and just like the air just goes out of the room. Yeah. And everybody's just like, and they're done for the day. It's like, and it could happen at 11 a.m. And it's so like, it's just like taking the air out. You're just sitting around staring into space while somebody's like dicking with something, trying to fix it. And it's like, that's the worst.
Yeah. Just not.
That is the worst.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You kind of answered another question I had already, which is how to set up the studio to make it feel like a creative playground.
Yeah.
Are there any pieces of gear you swear by that to help an artist perform their best or?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it really depends. I mean, there's different artists who I know have different things that make them feel comfortable, but there's no like one particular thing that I like need to have to it really like, I think I kind of enjoy it being situationally dependent. Like that's more fun for me. Right. It's like, if you want to come in from this angle, like that gives me an opportunity to try this and I haven't done that. I'm going to fucking rent this or use this like that, and just like, I'll make it interesting for myself too.
Of course. And do you have any cool stories about connecting with an artist that made this session really click?
I did a session with an artist called Bilal.
Okay.
Who is very linked into, I don't know if you remember, like the Soulquarians movement of like early 2000s. So it'd be like D'Angelo, Questlove, Erykah Badu, like a lot of the Philly people. It was that sort of neo soul kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He was a part of that, insanely talented. Mm-hmm. And this was at Interscope. And he came in with his whole band. And they had like, he had a guitar, and I think like we had a Rhodes there or something like that. They really didn't have any of their stuff. They just had some random instruments laying around the studio. And he really felt like he was getting like pushed into doing the song by the A&R guy, and he really kind of didn't want to be there and stuff. And he was like, "Oh, let me guess. I have to go sit sit by myself in the control room with the fancy mic." And I was like, "No, man, we'll figure it out. Wherever you want to record is cool." Right. And he was just like, "What?" And so we set them all in there. The drummers like literally like kicking a trash can and playing like a music stand, and and they were all in the same room. He just had an SM7 like this, and he was just like so stoked that he could just like that it didn't have to be this whole thing, and he could just chill and see all his guitar players right next to him, so he could kind of like nudge him when he wanted to change to the next part and stuff. And it was like, I think he was really prepared to have like a miserable day, and then it ended up being pretty easy. And it was like it was
because it's just adapting, to what they're going for.
Yeah, and it's just like if you're telling me right off the bat that there's this specific thing that makes you miserable. Like, why would I? Like, it's so counterintuitive to get a good performance. Like, it's like you can do whatever you want, whatever makes you comfortable and I'll just make it work. Like, I'm not gonna like have you bend to what I need. Like, that's the whole opposite of what we're trying to do.
Exactly. And this kind of ties into the next question. But how do you read the room when the energy feels off? I mean, obviously, reading the room, quote unquote, is what most people talk about. But what do you do when it feels off?
I mean, it depends how off. Like if you're dealing with a band, then like sometimes you just gotta leave and let them deal with it. They're gonna have to like, because you don't want to pick sides. Again, now we're getting into like producer stuff. But,
of course.
But sometimes in that situation where you got a bunch of guys in a band kind of like hashing it out, you're just like, I'm gonna go get a coffee and like maybe we'll talk in 20.
Right.
But I think if you're dealing with like a solo artist or a singer or something like that, then you need to be a little more involved and be like, are you cool? You want to take a break? Do you need food? Like, is something sounding funny to you? Is there, do you want to, have somebody go get your dog? So you're, whatever it is,
Right.
I think then you're in that situation, it's a little more personal, and you have to kind of like be a little more involved in that respect.
Of course. Do you do more engineering, producing, mixing? I mean, we all do everything, but
yeah, I would say we all do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You do everything.
Right.
I don't know that there's anything that I do more than anything else at this point.
Nice. I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide for creating massive snare sounds. In it, I go over all my techniques, from drum choices, tuning, microphone placements, even mixing techniques. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/huge-snare. And now, back to the show. And how has your approach to working with artists changed over the years? How have you evolved?
Well, I think a lot of it comes back to how I was saying, like, you want to be invisible.
Okay.
And it's just like, everything doesn't have to be complicated. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't need like 3 pieces of gear on the hi-hat. I don't need to be like so over the top with everything. I think I'm more like, I think everybody's sort of similar. When you first start doing this, your impulse is to plug in everything in the room and run everything through everything and just like make a huge mess and and that's great. But as your taste refines and everything, you sort of start to embrace minimalism a little bit, which isn't to say like I don't like messing with new gear or anything like that, but it's just like I don't want to interfere with the process. So it's like, I'm not going to like stack up so much shit that people are uncomfortable in the control room or something like that. Or just, especially again, that's more of like a tracking thing. If you're mixing, like you're coming into my zone. So I don't really, I'm less concerned about how comfortable you are, but.
And I just realized too, like I've kind of picked up the habit of like when I'm tracking, I'll put a lot of shit on there because, now that I think about it, it comes from the day when I didn't really have a decent setup at home to mix, and I was relying on mixing in a studio, and I only have so many compressors over there.
Right.
So let me make sure and use some on the way in before.
Right. Well, I agree with that too, and that's a good thing to talk about. Because I always advocate for committing what you like to tape.
Right.
And that's one of my pet peeves is when I get a session to mix and everything has a DI and everything has 2 microphone inputs and everything has a clean signal.
Yeah.
And it's just like, no,
right.
That's not cool. It's not cool.
Yeah.
You should be confident enough as an engineer to be able to get 2 microphones, get them in phase and balanced and record that to a track for a guitar.
Right.
That's ridiculous otherwise. and pedals, distortion. I'll even, if something's cool, I print reverbs all the time.
Right.
Because it's like, it's great. Some analog box, like we're never going to get that again.
Yeah.
Great.
That's true.
Or like the BX or any kind of pedal or anything like that. Like I'm printing that.
Right.
And vocal effects, you know, unless there's a specific thing where like, this is really weird and I'm not sure if it's going to work. Right. We should back it up just in case.
Print it on another track just in case.
But like, I will never print microphones from guitars separately.
Right.
Anything like, if I've, 2 mics on the snare, I'm combining those. I mean, on the top, I'm combining those. I really.
Right.
You're
all about making decisions.
Yeah, and that's part of it too. It's just like, and if there's something that especially like on a guitar solo, like you're playing into the delay or the reverb or whatever.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, what are we doing?
Why would you take it off?
Yeah, why would you take it off?
Yeah. Exactly.
And also, it's like you have all these. I don't know. When I'm tracking, I bring a lot of pedals and all kinds of stuff, so you can get all these cool, unique sounds. And that's the whole idea, is to capture that.
Right.
And it's like I've had clients come in where it's like you're getting sounds like drum sounds or whatever, and while you're doing that, they're like putting plugins on and stuff. Right. And it's like, oh, I love this, and I'm just like, well, whoa, let's just like, what do you love about that? Let's like do it.
Yeah.
Like let's do it for real.
Right.
Like we're here. Like let's like.
Exactly.
Let's get this as close as we can to what you're actually hearing before you start like doing crazy shit to it. Like let's record it right.
Exactly.
Exactly. And that, but you can understand why people do that because they don't. A lot of people, recording is harder than people think.
Yeah.
So it's like they kind of do it and they're like, oh, this doesn't sound so great. Right. Like it's okay, but it's not great. And then
I want to be able
go
to
to the
change
plugins
it later
and plugins and it's like.
Well, not only that, but Pro Tools now, it's practically unlimited track counts. So before, it's like days of tape and all that, you had to make decisions like that because you didn't have the tracks to do that. So,
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And that's, it's a whole separate thing.
Right.
But yeah, I think committing, is like owning your skills enough to commit stuff is important.
Yeah. And also, like, I've been... I kind of toe the line a little bit where I will commit stuff and put compressors on and get sounds, but I try not to go too extreme. Sure. Because then your hands are tied in the mix, but you still want to get people excited when they're in the room and everything else. It's like a fine line you got to walk. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to collaboration and teamwork, how do you get everyone on the same page, from musicians to producers?
That's true. I mean, that's true. That's kind of the key to the whole thing, right? Yeah. I don't know. I don't have like a set answer for that. Yeah. Again, it's very super situationally.
Right. That's true.
Dependent.
Yeah.
But I think having discussions before you go into the studio are really helpful. Mm-hmm. Even if you're not the producer, even if you're just the engineer.
Right.
Like I said, like a Spotify playlist, or like, what are you listening to right now that like, what's your vibes for this? Are we going, do you want like a Stax vibe or like a metal drum set? Like what are we talking?
Exactly.
And then having other people agree with that too, because you could have a conversation with the drummer where he's like, I want everything to sound like this, and then you talk to the guitar player who wants it to sound like this, and then you talk to like, it's like everybody has like a different vision of what they want this record to sound like.
Exactly.
And then and then you have to start of like getting people together in a room and
making sure we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, we're making the same album.
Exactly. And obviously, being in the studio, as we're talking about, is a lot about, psychology.
Yeah.
And working with that aspect. How do you help artists shake off nerves before recording?
I think part of that is having all that stuff set up, like we mentioned.
Right.
Because if they see that things are broken and funny, like they're immediately, their radar's going to be up like, well, what's going on?
Right.
And I think, to me, I think that the best sessions, especially for vocal sessions, are when things are peaceful.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you have to ask people to leave.
Right.
Which is very, very touchy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've definitely like had people not be super thrilled at me about that. Not the artist, but the people who I was asking to please chill.
Right.
And then that puts you in a not great situation, but sometimes it's something that you have to do.
Right.
Because, singing, especially if you're, just a vocalist, you're not in a band, you're just a singer.
Right.
Like, it's so personal and important. And I feel like for you to feel like people are like watching you and judging you while you're doing it is bad. Or even if you are like really putting your heart into this and you look into the control room and then like there's a bunch of your friends who are just like chatting and bullshitting in the control room, like that sucks also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then it's like, well, what the fuck,
Yeah.
So to me, it's just better the smaller you can make that circle.
Right.
And there's even been situations where I'll set something up, and if like the artist, if they've wanted that, like if there's a guitar player or somebody else who's like they're very close with or whatever, like I'll just be like, just Apple spacebar. You can, I'll sit in the lounge if you need anything.
Yeah.
You guys just hang.
Exactly.
And that's fine.
And even too, like, as an assistant, I've been asked a number of times to step out because, like you go to a studio, you, as the engineer, you know the artist, you've talked to them in advance, you have this relationship already, and then there's this person that you've never met before, you met
staring at
an
them,
hour ago, it's like, who is this guy?
Right.
Like, what the hell?
Right. Right. And I really understand that. And, asking an assistant to leave is fine. Like that's, that's part of the gig. Like sometimes it's just, we're good.
Right.
And that's never like, I've never had an issue with that. But sometimes when there's like a whole, like managers and friends and stuff,
yes,
like,
that's
this is
true.
not, and like trying to do that diplomatically is scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really not fun.
Is there we talked a little bit before we started about Atmos. I'd love to know if there's any trends or tech you're excited about that could change how engineers and artists collaborate.
Well, you mean Atmos related or just tech in general?
I mean, either one, really.
Well, I think Atmos specifically, I don't do tons of Atmos. I have at points. At the moment, I'm not. But they're integrating more and more tools for it into Pro Tools, which I think is smart. Because in the earlier days, you'd have to use separate render software, if not a separate rendering computer.
Right.
And just making everything talk to each other was mind melting.
Yeah.
So the more streamlined they can make it, the more accessible they can make it to engineers to get their heads around it. I think that's smart. Tech in general, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get the name right, but there's that Listen Back. Is that correct? The software.
Oh,
so you can sort of listen to stuff via Pro Tools sessions. I've had some success with that, doing pandemic kind of things. That's kind of neat. I don't think it's quite it's even the tech from a year ago is way better, but it's going to be something that a few years from now is going to be a very big, like zero latency recording your friend in their room and stuff like
exactly.
that. That's, I think, where we're kind of headed, but it's at this point, it's still like a little bit funky and this person has this Pro Tools and you have this version of this software and it's glitchy and but that's coming.
It's definitely come a long way from
and I think it's
ISDN
close to being
lines
very usable.
Exactly. Nice.
Other than that, I don't know. I feel like plugins keep sounding better and better.
Yeah. Right.
Like there's a lot of analog stuff that I still use, but there is also a lot that I've just completely replaced with plugins.
Right.
Certainly it's like, things that were digital to begin with.
Right. Of course.
The reverbs and stuff like that is obviously like no-brainer kind of.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, I'm not super techie. A lot of, I don't know, I wouldn't say a sound, but a lot of like what I like to do is just like pedals and strange things and making, noise escapes. And I worked on a record, which I don't know, may or may not do anything, but we used a lot, like I would I got into making tape loops, cassette tape loops. So you get like a 10-second loop.
Oh, wow.
And then you just record whatever onto it, whether it's a tone or something modulating or whatever. And then, so I would make one of those at the beginning of the day, like before the band got in there. I'd make like just play like a weird chord or something, and then and then just run that in the background, and then they would just jam on top of it.
Nice.
And then that would turn into all this cool stuff.
That's
and then
crazy.
that was we did that for a couple weeks, where that would be like the way the day would start, is I would make some weird loop, and then they would just play on top of it, and then that would morph into something else. And we were recording all of this, and then come back and identify cool pieces and stuff like that. But it was like a way of like, I should do that again. But it was a cool way of like kind of like getting the creativity for the day going and like
nice.
Nice.
Is there any current or recent projects that you're allowed to talk about, or stuff that came out recently?
Well, obviously the Chili Pepper records.
Right.
There's a couple things that are finishing up that I can't talk about yet. There's several video game soundtracks.
Okay.
And I wish I could remember.
Did you do those in Atmos or no?
Names of them. Yeah, a couple of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice.
That's how I met the company, and then I started doing stereo stuff for them because while we were touring, I obviously can't mix Atmos, but cool. A lot of their stuff is still stereo. But yeah, that's how I initially started. The company's called 10 Cent.
Okay.
I don't know a lot about video games, but they're fairly large apparently.
Cool.
And it's funny because one of the trailers, I had they wanted a rapper, so I had a friend of mine, do a verse on it, and they kind of gave him like pretty specific notes about what they wanted, and we did that and mixed it and sent it to him. And I forget, but it's he sent it to me on YouTube like 6 months later, and the clip had like 3 billion views or something crazy.
Jesus. Nice. Awesome.
So that's fun. I'm trying to think about anything else that's notable. Yeah, the Atmos mixes, a bunch of catalog stuff, some of which is out, some of which isn't.
I wanted to ask you about that too, because I've done a number of Atmos things myself, but I've always done it with tracks that I've mixed in stereo first.
Right.
So doing catalog is obviously a whole nother can of worms, because you have to recreate the old mix before you even start. What does that process look like?
Well, it's in a couple cases, it was artists that I had worked with. So it was just, I just had the original multi-tracks and I kind of knew what they were all about.
Right.
A couple cases, this was sort of early and when all this was going on, I would get other people's multi-tracks, which are a giant mess. Right. And it was like, what is this? And stuff's missing or backward. Like, it's not arranged right. It's like, it's all just like, it was really, and you're sort of doing an all-in rate. So something that was like, oh, this is going to take me 4 hours. It's like, oh, this is going to take me 4 days.
Exactly. Jeez.
And then if you're doing some of the catalog work, more in more recent past couple of years, they will have sort of prep departments who are putting the stems together, making sure you have everything you need, and blah blah blah.
To eliminate the 4-day problem.
A-Bing to the master and all that kind of stuff. Make sure the arraignment's there. So that's cool.
That's cool. Nice.
But then you're also getting their stems, which may or may not have stuff committed that you may or may not agree with, and so there's no easy, and everything has its issues. But but the basic thing is that they want it done fast,
right?
And they're not like trying to reinvent the wheel with every song,
right?
So
right.
You gotta just like figure it out.
It's like that's the difference too. Is like we already know what the end product should be,
right?
It's like the old mix. You got to match that. It's not like mixing from scratch.
And that to me is also like silly too. It's like, why are you bothering? If there's just like a little more if there's a little more reverb around your head, why are we doing this? I don't understand. I've been lucky enough so that a couple of the artists I did it for was like, we already have the stereo, so just like make it crazy. Right. What's the point?
Right.
And that's what we did, and we would have things, not to the point where it was distracting, but really sort of like using the technology a little bit and spending like a day and a half on a song, like you really would,
Awesome. Nice.
But that's very few and far between.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Very few.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, I like to wrap up each podcast with the same kind of set of questions.
Sure.
The first one is, who has been your most influential teacher? And it could be a couple. It doesn't have to be just one.
God, that's tricky. I don't know. I mean, there's been so many engineers that I've really... I mean, obviously, Jimbo, who I mentioned before. Right. There was an engineer from New York whose name was Bob Cadway. Okay. And he was... there was several guys there. Bob Cadway, this guy Tom Yezi, both, Bob passed. Tom Yezi still makes records. Dibs, this guy David Shackney, who made a lot of really cool records, and he was at the time he was a few years older than me, but was kind of like also doing Pro Tools and doing things with loops and samplers and stuff, and like all the kind of stuff that I wanted to learn how to do.
Nice.
And out here, an engineer called Ed Thacker, who's like an A&M guy.
Yeah, I know Ed.
And I assisted him a lot.
Nice.
And he taught me a lot.
Nice.
Or even Michael Boddicker, the synth player, who, a lot really gave us a lot of freedom in that space to kind of do our thing and learn and stuff, and not harass us about using the studio and just kind of,
Exactly. Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Next question is, what is your favorite reference track? If you have to go to a new studio, what do you put on to check out the room?
To be honest with you, I rarely do that.
Really?
Because it freaks me out.
What?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Because I feel like it just starts making me second guess myself.
Okay.
I know that sounds weird, but between the reference track and the room and the speaker, and I just feel like it's adding a layer of insecurity that I don't need.
Do you normally bring...
I will if I'm mixing, different story.
Right, of course.
But tracking,
Okay. Do you
I just have to trust my
bring your own monitors, or do you go with what they have?
I try to.
Okay.
If it's like one day quickie, then no.
Yeah,
then I'll just ask for NS10s or whatever.
Right.
But
okay.
Yeah. I like the new it's funny. People are usually like ATC or PMC. They don't like both, but I kind of do.
Yeah. Cool.
So I will go back and forth.
Yeah.
I'm not like super loyal to. I mean, there's monitors that I definitely don't like, but as long as I've got. Well, honestly, like probably 70% of the stuff I do on Oratones at this point.
Right. That's awesome.
Because I know what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I can get drum sounds on Oratones because I've done it a billion times, and I know the room's not going to affect it. I can listen. I know what I'm getting.
Exactly.
And it's just like I can take it anywhere, and I know what it's going to sound like.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Last question. What would be one tidbit for an upcoming engineer?
I would... one? God, that's hard. I would say don't get caught up in like the plug-in game. Mm-hmm. Because and it happens to all of us, but it's just like, you're like, oh, I need that. And then you have 500,000 plugins and you use like 6 of them.
Yes.
And then it's just like, you're just wasting so much time.
Right.
And the other thing I would say is, in general, like, don't get caught up in all that, like, meaningless tech bullshit.
Right.
Like, you have to have a connection with the artist. Mm-hmm. And that's really the most important thing.
Right.
And there's a lot of engineers now, especially now, who are the engineers because they're somebody's friend.
Right.
And they feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And that's really important. And then it's just like up to them to kind of like get their tech skills up to speed a little bit to be able to like get what needs to be done. But that tells you like what artists want in an engineer.
Right.
Like they don't want somebody who's like, you know, knows all this insane tech stuff but has no people skills, and it's like that's not the gig.
Exactly.
You know,
that's a big part of why I focus this podcast around those kind of questions, because there's so much out there about the tech stuff and nerding out on gear
reviews is endless.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so subjective too. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm really not going to learn anything from some guy talking about like that. It's like maybe I'll get the sense of like maybe I should try this out, but you know,
yeah,
and that's not super interesting to me.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think the fact that artists, especially now when they're recording in hotel rooms and stuff like that, are looking to like their buddies to figure this out and become their engineer rather than hire an engineer.
Right.
I don't even think it's a cost thing necessarily. I think because they're paying these guys, they're not doing it for free. Like somebody's getting paid.
Yeah.
But it's just like I want to be comfortable. I want to not, you know, again, have all these weird people in the room that I don't know and be under like a spotlight while I'm trying to be vulnerable and creative.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's like, you know, so important. And then it's like I've seen, you know, engineers and assistants and stuff who are constantly like taking pictures and shit. And like, you know, it's just like, you know, like, it's like, what are you doing?
Right.
What are you doing? You know, it's just like, you know, and that's honestly, and that's why there's like so many people who it just kind of never happens.
Yeah.
Because like you said before, and we were talking about that ability to read the room is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just don't have it.
Right. For sure.
And a lot of them have great technical skills, and maybe it's like then you go and like build tube mics or something.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And I'd be happy to use it.
Yeah.
But nice. I think that's an important thing to take away.
Absolutely.
Is that it's just like you have to be like a person that people like to be around.
Right. Exactly.
Is the key.
Nice. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review or comment. I'll see you next week.